In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why Portsmouth didn't beat Oxford United last night. Let's go. Before we do get going, delving deep into this game, I've got to tell you, over 60% of the people that watch this podcast on a regular basis aren't yet subscribed. If that's one of you, please make sure you change that. We're looking to grow and expand the audience in different ways. Let's begin. For me, there's three really important aspects that we have to explore. The first is Pompey's defensive frailties, the second is Oxford's changing shape, and the final one is the impact of Callum Lang. We're going to touch on all of those, but first, let's unpack the game briefly and then go into the details. In the first half, Pompey were quite sloppy, quite passive in possession, and the general first half tempo was extremely slow. It felt quite lethargic, and they were being forced to do things they didn't really want to do, and also that weren't working. We'll go into detail on those later, because I think Oxford were a big reason why that was taking place. But they did surprise me, not for the good reasons. I thought it was a really poor first 45 from a Portsmouth point of view. When looking at the graph in front of you, brought to you by SofaScore, the graph does represent the tempo of the first half well. Pompey with all of the ball, but no chances to show for it. Pompey's first half XG was 0.12, and they nearly had 70% of the ball. Ultimately, very little came from plenty of possession. Oxford looked to play in transition every time. That was quite consistent across the 90 minutes, and the change in formation was key in doing so and being effective on the turnover too. Chances were so limited in that first half. In fact, Goodhram's goal was the only shot on target both teams had. It was an extremely tough watch from especially a Portsmouth point of view, because they had no output to show from it. In the second half, things did open up and Pompey started to play with more attacking purpose. And when looking back at the graph now, this time focusing on the second half, the graph does show how Pompey grew into the game. The size of the bars are clearly longer with much more effective chance creation. The second burst of Pompey attack is visualised clearly here on the graph, and just minutes after Lang came on and Mousinho changed in shape, that all occurred. That is no coincidence. As I feared, Lang was the difference maker. You can watch the video on the channel. We spoke exactly as to why Lang is coming in to be a season-defining signing potentially at Portsmouth, and that goal at one point looked to be a huge one, a very significant one in the season. It still might be, but we saw straight away the impact of Callum Lang. Again, more on that later when we look at the tactics board, but yeah, Lang came on and was superb. It was a strange game for game management from Pompey, and that's my final point on the second half in a brief sense. But the incredible spirit of Oxford United and fight back, because at one point it absolutely reeked of Derby at home a couple of weeks ago, where we invited pressure, conceded, and again eventually started losing the game of football, but did not have the energy to come back and get something from it. And of course we did go 2-1 down after being 1-0 up. We did invite pressure, but that extra spark and belief, spirit that we showed was huge, and it's going to be huge for Des Buckingham going forward. To earn something from that game in the end is massive, and Pompey fans thinking that we're celebrating a point, take that as a compliment, because it is a really important point, especially the timing of the goal and the circumstances too. So it's time we take this to the tactics board. You can see on the screen now, these are the two 11s for both Oxford and Pompey. I'm also going to put up the average position so you get a really good idea of exactly where each player was. I've tried to recreate those and bring them back over to the tactics board as well, so we get a really good grip of where each player was and how the game panned out. Now, while you do that, I'm going to tell you the most important piece of news for Oxford, and that is the return of the back four with actual wingers in actual wide areas. We did a video on Sunday explaining how the three at the back formation, the 3-4-3, was not working. It was a nightmare. We saw in the first half against Bristol Rovers, we're being overrun in key areas. There was a real lack of ability to hit the wide areas and be effective from the flanks, which is a huge part of Des Buckingham's style of play. It was a nightmare. It was not working at all, and we spoke in depth about that. Thankfully, Des Buckingham has changed, and we went to a back four with Smith coming in for Stevens, who was injured in the first 10-15 minutes. I've put Smith in there. He played the majority of the game. Moore and Brown, and then Greg Lee at left back, and then having the extra midfielder in there, and then being able to play the actual wingers in actual wide areas, as I've said, was a massive, massive plus. Now, having Bury in particular starting this game was really, really important, and we saw his impact when he came on against Bristol Rovers. He is that athletic, quick, strong, powerful wide player that we've been missing, and he came on and was fantastic. I was so impressed with him. And then on the other side, you had Tyler Goodhram, who could play inverted, and we said in the video on Sunday, having Bury almost touchline touch tight, if you like, is fine, because then you've got Goodhram being inverted. Whereas if you've got Rodriguez playing as part of a front three and a 3-4-3 and Goodhram playing inverted as well, you're suddenly playing so narrow. I mean, I can demonstrate it for you. Let's say Bury is the extra fullback and you make that a back three. You've then got Tyler coming in and Goodhram, and suddenly that space there is extremely narrow. And I visualised it in the video. This is where we need to be hitting those areas, these boxes here, in those flanks. And I can tell you that did happen. That did happen because you've got Bury in there, and then you've got Lee able to overlap because you've got Goodhram playing slightly more narrow. The goal came from Goodhram tucking in slightly more narrow and taking a shot from outside the box. But you've got that ability to be much more creative from the wide areas, and we saw that with Bury up there. And then having Ruben much better in the 10. We'll come on to that in a minute because he's much more effective there. But that was a really clever, but it needed to happen, addition from Des Buckingham from a tactical sense. Again, it gave us that pace to be effective on the turnover. And that's clearly what Oxford United and Des Buckingham wanted to do, be effective on the break. And when you've got someone like Bury and Goodhram who are quick, and Rodriguez who can find those passes with ease, along with Brannigan, leaving McGuane to be a bit more of the dirty work midfielder, all of those simple patterns of play are made much easier. And there was a sense of clarity within performance, if you like. I think we noticed that as fans even. There was clarity. I said the word confused in that video. On Sunday, it was a confusing feel to it, and the players also looked confused. There was so much more clarity, and that was a huge reason why I think everything felt smoother, like I said, on that breakaway. Another massive bonus to reverting back to the 4-3-3 is having that extra man in the midfield. Of course, with that 3-4-3, you've only really got two central midfielders, and we saw against Bristol Rovers, McEachran and Brannigan were being outrun. There was nobody winning the ball back and then able to play in transition and open things up in a progressive sense. It was really flat. You've got very similar players there. Of course, Brannigan much better, but there's no clear balance, I should say, in that side. We saw with that extra player, McGuane can focus on keeping the likes of Pitt Harris quieter. He's the more advanced attacking midfielder for Pompey. You've got Brannigan with the licence, and then Ruben, that more sort of fancy, technical midfielder who can find those wide passes. But I can tell you right now, of course, Lowry came on for Morel, who was injured. Whether that's Morel or Lowry or Pack in that midfield, if you play a two and then Pitt Harris in front of them, that two is going to get overrun, and we would have lost that midfield battle for, totally. I think at times they had the better of us, at times we had the better of them. I think it was fairly equal in the midfield. I can tell you right now, if we didn't change formation and we'd stayed with that two that comes with that formation, we would have been outplayed and we'd have lost that midfield battle. It's a cliche that I say so many times. I think it is overused, but it is true, and that's why I keep saying it. Games are won in that midfield and also lost in that midfield too. I think if we had played a two, we would have lost that midfield battle pretty comfortably, because the talent on display in that Pompey midfield was marvellous, even with that extra numerical helping as well. Also, like I said, Ruben in that number 10 is really significant. As much as it allowed us to have Bury out wide and Goodhram further out wide and stop this narrowness to us, Ruben was forced to play is almost as an 8 against Bristol Rovers, and that was not working. Having him as that 10, he's so much better. He can get hold of the ball in zone 14 because they distribute that to Bury and to Goodhram. And then suddenly you've got that breakaway. You've got that breakaway to be effective in creation. And we couldn't really create against Bristol Rovers because we're trying to almost stop the fact that we're missing a player as it was in the midfield. And Rodriguez now can say, right, you two do your job, McGuane and Brannigan. I'm going to sit in front and I'm going to create. And he's so much more effective in that position. A really key partnership that I noticed as the game went on was Lee and Goodhram on Oxford's left-hand side. You've got Goodhram, who, like I said, is going to play slightly more narrow, but that does allow Lee to overlap and still offer that wide space on the left. And we know Lee is a top defender. His aerial ability was great. He kept Kamara quiet for the most part. I thought defensively, hardly put a foot wrong. And then going forward, he's still just as effective as well. And he knows Goodhram is going to play slightly more inverted. You've then got someone like Greg Lee who can still offer that wide almost option. And again, like I say, Bury's the wide option on the right. Goodhram can invert. You've still got Lee if you've got the ball, because he's got the work rate to come back and if that turnover does occur on the opposite side. He's got a great work rate and a great engine on him. The final big point at Oxford tactically was the press. We were very effective when pressing, and I want to highlight Harris because he was almost against Raggett and Shaughnessy in that press every single time, and that battle was quite fascinating. It was very clear early on that Raggett did not want the ball. I think we all know that Raggett is not comfortable with the ball at his feet, and ultimately the majority of his defending, he wants to come aerially, and when he's got the ball at his feet, he is not comfortable. And Shaughnessy is better than Raggett. Obviously, Regan Paul, who was initially meant to be Shaughnessy's partner, is 10 times better than both of them combined. But I think Shaughnessy being with Raggett doesn't actually help Shaughnessy at all, because he looks more difficult with the ball at his feet because he hasn't got that natural option. If he's got Paul next to him, he's comfortable just giving him the ball. He doesn't really want to go to Raggett, and then you're sort of stuck in two minds. Defenders don't want to think. They want to do the simple thing quite quickly. Go back to the goalkeeper, try and pass it to a midfielder, which did happen in the second half slightly more when Lowry came on. But it was very clear Harris, who, whether he's scoring goals or not, he's going to run for days. He had Raggett on his toes, and a few times he cracked. He really did. I think that was the trigger press every time. Find Raggett, run at him. How many times did he go back to Shaughnessy, who then went long over to Kamara? And that's when I'm going to mention Lee aerially. He was great at winning that ball back in the air, because the diag from Shaughnessy to Kamara, again, always came from Harris pressing, panicking ball to Shaughnessy, direct ball. Same with Raggett with Norris. Pass to Norris, has to go back, then there's a diag ball. And that comes from the defending of Oxford in the front. I mean, we say defending from the front, and sometimes people don't quite know what I mean. That's what we mean. It's about defending Pompey's back line in an attacking sense, confusing I know, and then forcing them to do something they don't want to do, and that's go extremely direct. And that is not the way that Pompey want to attack. They want to be front-footed, but they want to do it in a more patient way, but to be more intricate, really, in the way they build up from back to front. That's why Regan Paul came in. It makes it even more clear why Tom McIntyre was signed, because he's somebody who's very comfortable with the ball at his feet, and that transition from back to front is made much simpler, because they were being hindered by a centre-back that did not like being pressed, and were forcing them to play in a different way. As for Pompey, I thought there was such an improvement in the way they progressed the ball forward. There was a real zip and bravery to their attack, and I think Lowry dropping deeper as that collector of the ball, and then distributing that to Marlon Pack, who has an unbelievable passing range. How many times do we see him switch the ball forward? It was so fascinating. It wasn't nice as an Oxford fan, because you're thinking, if he pings that ball, oh wait, he's done it. They've got so much space to run and to exploit, and he is incredible at finding a pass. How many times did he switch it over to Lane, switch it over to Ogilvie, who was bombing forward, or even Devlin in that first half in particular? It was great to see somebody in the flesh be that good at passing. Brannigan can do it as well, but with Pack, there was a real sense of, right, we need to stop the source here, because he is running the game in terms of the passes that he can pick out. That's probably why he was more advanced than Lowry, because he's got that passing range and ability to open a game up in an instant. The second thing to highlight from that midfield is Peter Harris, because Lowry and Pack, I think, did a great job, but Peter Harris is really fascinating. Take a look at his personal heat map. He is operating as a left midfielder, almost as a Mazzala. If you've played Football Manager, you know what I'm talking about. In a midfield three, he's a left advanced player, almost doubling up with Lane. I didn't think Lane had a brilliant game, but I think when that does develop, Lane and Peter Harris on that left-hand side is going to be a problem, a real problem. He loves getting into those spaces. He's physical. He's got an aura about him, which is, again, quite bizarre to talk about a footballer in that way, but if you've watched him play and you've seen him, he's got that physical, strong, tall aura. I'll say again about him. He's got that presence. You could tell he's played at a high level. You can tell he's played in the Premier League this season. He has got that confidence and composure about him, and him in that space when they establish that partnership more and more over time. Look, I think Smith did quite a good game of keeping Lane quiet. And obviously they had Stevens at right back Oxford for a period of time too. So again, I thought both of those players did a great job. But over time, Lane's firing, Pet Harris keeps firing. That's going to be a problem. He has got an aura about him for sure. As well as talking about Lane and bringing it back to Kamara as well. I spoke earlier about how Greg Lee I thought was great. It did get more complicated as it went on. But when it was 1v1, Kamara versus Greg Lee, and when Lane was against Smith or Stevens, I thought the wide players of Pompey weren't as effective as they could have been. And especially in that first half, I think Kamara was good for the first goal. Lane was quiet throughout. But we spoke about Oxford coming into this game. If we're going to have a chance of getting something from the match, is keeping those wide players as quiet as possible. And we did a video on Pompey a few months ago now. I think it was the title of why they're so special. And one of the key points was their wide players are so important. Mousinho wants his wide players to get hold of the ball. And look, they did get on it sometimes, but they weren't as effective 1v1. And I think that was probably a big reason why it was much more difficult for them to attack. It wasn't as fluid because you've got Lane and Kamara not quite at it. The move to a back three for Pompey, let's talk about it, because it was clever. It was very, very clever, and it pinned Oxford back. I think the thinking behind it was get more attacking players of Pompey in advanced positions, and also understand that if we've got the majority of the ball, yes, they're playing on the turnover, but we can win this game. It was a forward-thinking, winning type of change. The idea was to win this game of football. Essentially, Devlin came off for Lang, and you saw Lang come in as his right forward, Kamara and Lane slightly deeper to become wing backs. This becomes a very more established back three. Larry still collects the ball from Shaughnessy in that position. Still a midfield two, you'd say, with Larry and Pack. But it's almost now a 3-2-5. It is very, very forward. And like I said, it's about winning this game of football for Pompey. That's what it was. It was a very, very positive substitution. And look, that's why I said earlier about Lee. I think he did great 1v1 with Kamara. However, when you throw Lang in the mix, you've now got an extra player who can play as a winger and a striker, and somebody who's got an eye for goal, also very quick. He's a great hybrid player. Much better off the right, but he's a hybrid attacker. He's a hybrid forward. He's going to try and find spaces and try and exploit it. Sitting in behind Brown and Lee was a really good way of doing that. And let's talk about his goal. He was a game changer. He came on and looked at home, and he was only on for about 10 minutes before scoring. He came on, changing system. The goal is incredible. Good hold up, great turn, fantastic finish. Nearly the dream debut if it was the winner. But we said in the video, on the right, he's very, very effective. He's going to find gaps. He's going to be very, very clever with the runs that he makes, and he's got a great finish on him. Now, we said, is he going to hit the ground running? I mean, look, it's one game. It's one half of football, not even that. But if you can play like that, and if Lang can play like that on a consistent basis, you've got a really exciting attack on your hands. And we saw that within 10-15 minutes of him coming on. He can make an impact straight away. He sat in between Brown and Lee, doubled up, overload, problems are caused. I wouldn't blame Lee or Brown for that. I think, really, for the majority of it, Oxford didn't quite settle with it. We didn't, thankfully, concede more than two. But it's no coincidence, at 1-0, that this game is in a back four and limited options for Pompey going forward that weren't ultimately toothless, really, for large parts. When it changes, they look much better. If I was going to criticise one thing about Mousinho and the decision to move to a back three, it would be that he was slightly more exposed on the turnover, and that was Oxford's game plan. I think the hope was score more goals and then be better at game management, because both of those goals did come from that change in shape. The second thing is the substitution. Taking Ogilvie off, I thought was really bizarre. Bringing Towler on, I say bizarre. I know why he's done it. Ogilvie hasn't played loads of games this season. Injury recently. Bring Towler on. He played the entire game against Fleetwood. It was against Fleetwood, wasn't it? Not Port Vale, against Fleetwood. He is somebody who can come on and should be fine. Didn't quite work out, though. He looked like a player that wasn't quite settled, wasn't quite ready. And look, we made some substitutions. We weren't very gifted with our bench, by the way. It was a terrible bench, really, in terms of attacking options. Not that the players were bad, but there just weren't many of them. Henry came on for Gwaine. That was slightly more the way we looked. And Henry was great when he came on, by the way. Harris then went, we saw the goal. Harris went 1v1 with Towler for the goal, and I think he should be doing far better than he was. I don't think Raggett and Norris are totally innocent within that move, but we're speaking about Towler looking a little bit shaken, and also you've got a back three there that aren't blessed with pace. A quick turnover wasn't the idea. That wasn't what Pompey wanted to do. They wanted to stay on that front foot and score more goals, really. 3-1, that could have been 3-1. They have that many players in the advanced positions. That's if I'm going to be really picky. I understand why he's done it, and that's ultimately why they get a point from it, because it was quite sloppy defending. Individual mistakes, very, very costly. Norris should be doing better. Like I say, Henry's come on. He's changed the game. He's 34, whatever he is. He's played over 600 games for Oxford. He's come on. He's got a really important goal. And his general play, I thought he added that sort of level-headed midfield presence that we needed. Bradigan sat deeper, and he found Harrison and O'Donker's going to run for days. So, yeah, if I was going to be really critical of Mousinho and Pompey, other than that, the switch was very, very clever and opened that game up. But that was a little bit, not naive, but that'll be their biggest letdown. When summing up and giving my final points on this game, with my neutral head purely on, which isn't always easy, especially when we're talking about Oxford in detail, I do genuinely believe a draw is a fair result from this game. If I had to pick a winner, Pompey would edge it, I think, on intent and a much improved second half. But at the same time, I don't remember loads more clear-cut chances that Pompey had. I don't remember a huge miss that occurred from a Pompey perspective. It felt fairly even in that sense. And the biggest reason why I think a draw is fair is because Oxford, in that first 45, took their one chance and the only shot on target, and Pompey were very lethargic. They were very, very strange in the ending the game management-wise too. I thought the top teams always are going to have to be starting strong and ending strong. I'm not saying Pompey aren't a top team, but they missed those two very avoidable aspects of a performance, or a complete performance, and that would be their biggest takeaway from it. We need to start better, we need to end better. That'll be their biggest frustration. I think both teams will find positives from this, even Pompey, who do feel like it's 2 points dropped. Callum Lang being the biggest one. I think we all a little bit confused as to sort of how he's going to come in, how he's going to settle, how he's going to kick on. Hasn't been in great form recently. Go and watch the video. I go into detail on that. But he's come in and he was a nuisance and a very, very good player from the off. He looked straight away like he was ready to kick on. That's a huge positive, I think. And Oxford as well. We need to get hold of games more, but we're playing Pompey. We've lost 2 games coming into it. I thought we were great in the way that we went out our game plan. It worked effectively. I'm not sure either side can be totally gutted, I'll be honest. But the ball's in your court. Let me know in the comment section down below. I'll be replying and responding to all of your thoughts as per usual. Please leave a like and subscribe. This has been my breakdown and tactical look at Oxford versus Pompey in Sky Bet League One last night. Take care.